Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we slip behind closed doors, beyond embroidered tapestries, through creaking stone corridors and beneath layers of history where no one was supposed to look. Deep under the gleaming floors of a regal palace, where the flicker of candlelight dares not linger long, there once lay a chamber so secret, so steeped in royal mischief, that few dared speak of it out loud. Some said it was a legend, just another palace ghost story, but others, the ones who cleaned behind the columns or poured the king's late-night wine, they knew better. The smell of jasmine, the echo of hushed laughter, the mysterious silk garments found in places they never should have been. Yes, they knew. And they knew something else too. They probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you've got a minute, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all begins in a city gilded with opulence, cobblestone avenues winding through bustling markets, golden domes catching the sun like a flirtatious wink. Here stands the palace of King Ferdinand, a monarch known officially for order, discipline, and an eye for architecture. Unofficially, well, let's just say Ferdinand had a taste for more than just balance sheets and blueprints. Most visitors marvelled at the throne room. High ceilings adorned with frescoes of heaven-bound angels, massive stained-glass windows casting mosaics of colour over polished marble. But just beyond that grandeur, beneath the throne itself, lay a sliver in the floor no one noticed, unless they were meant to. One gentle twist of a certain gemstone in the floor's inlay, and the mechanism clicked softly, barely louder than a sigh. Down went a square of stone, revealing a staircase spiralling into shadow. They called it the Velvet Hollow. Not officially, of course. Palace records made no mention of it. But amongst those who'd heard the whispers, the name fit perfectly. The hollow was carved out of the earth, its stone walls lined with silk, its floors cushioned with plush Persian rugs. And in the centre of the space, framed by 4 low pillars wrapped in red velvet, stood the king's private divan, a seat more suited to lounging than ruling. And yet, ruling was precisely what Ferdinand did here, in his own peculiar way. Now, before we start painting him as a cartoonish villain draped in robes and excess, let's remember that Ferdinand was a product of his time. Monarchs had concubines the way modern influencers have inboxes full of DMS. It wasn't considered shocking unless it was discovered. What made Ferdinand different wasn't the fact that he indulged. It was the lengths he went to keep it secret. Unlike his contemporaries who flaunted their lovers like fashion accessories, Ferdinand valued control above all. Control over his image, control over his court, and most of all, control over his desires. That's why the Hollow existed. It wasn't just a love nest, it was a world unto itself, curated like a gallery, maintained like a clock. The concubines chosen to reside there, temporarily or long-term, were not simply beautiful. They were clever, articulate, politically neutral, and entirely beholden to the king. Some were brought from distant lands as part of diplomatic arrangements. Others, plucked from local nobility, were offered as tributes disguised as court appointments. A few volunteered, lured by the promise of luxury, education, and the king's fleeting favour. All were warned. Their presence here must remain a secret, even to their own families. And for most, the consequences of slipping up weren't just shame, they were disappearance. Now here's the odd part. Despite the secrecy, Ferdinand wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. The Hollow was no dungeon. In fact, it might have been the most comfortable place in the entire palace. The concubines had access to tutors, music, books. Some even learned foreign languages or studied the sciences. Meals were prepared by top chefs, and wardrobes were rotated weekly with the latest fashions from across the continent. It was a velvet cage, yes, but velvet nonetheless. And like all cages, it came with rules. Rule number 1, the king chooses who sees him. No requests, no petitions. You might be summoned 3 times in 1 week, or not at all for months. Rule number 2, no one enters the Hollow without the king's signal. Not servants, not guards, not even his chief advisor. Rule number 3, never speak of the Hollow if you are ever released. A few were, by the way. Some concubines were granted land or husbands or roles in foreign courts, but they never talked, ever, at least not publicly. One has to wonder what kind of insurance policy Ferdinand kept over their silence. Historians still argue whether he used financial incentives, quiet threats, or simply the promise of ruinous scandal. Likely, it was a bit of all three. Ferdinand didn't leave things to chance. What he did leave, however, were subtle clues. Hidden among the tapestries in the hollow were embroidered initials, no doubt his own handiwork or that of a trusted servant. Some cushions bore intricate patterns that, when viewed under flickering candlelight, formed symbols from ancient mystic languages. A few corners of the chamber were fitted with mirrors angled just so, reflecting light in curious ways. One historian, decades later, swore these mirrors aligned to create a hidden message, though no one's ever decoded it fully. And then there was the music. Every evening a specific melody drifted through the hollow from a hidden phonograph, its origin unknown even to the concubines. It was always the same tune, haunting, slow, played on an instrument none of them could quite identify. Some said it was a dulcimer, others claimed it was a hybrid made just for the king. The song became their unofficial anthem, an eerie lullaby marking the passage of days in a place where time meant nothing. By now you might be wondering, why go to all this trouble? Why not just have a harem in the open as so many kings did? But Ferdinand was not most kings. He feared scandal more than he feared death. His kingdom had barely survived a war of succession a generation prior, and his claim to the throne, while solid, was not unshakable. A single well-timed rumour about impropriety could unravel alliances, stir up religious outrage, or worse, embolden rivals. The hollow was his compromise, a secret life that let him indulge without risk, or so he thought. Of course, secrets have a way of leaking, like ink through parchment, like wine through cracked glass, and it started with the perfume. You see, Ferdinand insisted on a specific scent being used in the hollow, a blend of sandalwood, orange blossom, and a pinch of crushed cardamom. It was exotic, subtle, and utterly distinctive. And one day, a courtier noticed it lingering on the hem of the king's robe during a council meeting. A tiny detail, easily dismissed. But it caught the attention of the wrong person, someone who had smelled that same perfume once before, in the arms of a girl who claimed to be just a maid. From there, the questions began, quietly of course. Nobody dared confront the king outright, but guards were bribed, laundry staff questioned, a visiting duchess, known for her curiosity, even sketched a suspicious pattern she'd seen in a hallway mosaic, and sent it to a historian friend. The pieces began to assemble, not into a full picture, but into an intriguing blur, enough to stir unease, enough to start a game of dangerous guessing. And all the while, down below the throne, life in the hollow continued, unaware that the outside world was beginning to feel the heat of its buried flame. Ferdinand wears many masks, each one crafted with the care of a theatre artisan. In public he's a monarch of moderation, measured in speech, deliberate in movement, stern yet just. His advisers admire him, or at least pretend to. Foreign dignitaries praise his intelligence, even if they find his smile a little too controlled. He speaks 6 languages fluently, dances like a man half his age, and never once raises his voice in court. People trust a king who seems too composed to misbehave. But behind that cool exterior brews something more complex. In the early days of his reign, Ferdinand's reputation is carefully moulded to withstand scrutiny. After all, his ascent was not without turbulence. He'd been the second son, never meant to wear the crown. Only after his elder brother's sudden illness, and even more sudden death, did Ferdinand find himself cloaked in royal robes. Whispers, of course, followed. They always do. Did the fever really strike so swiftly? Did the palace physician truly make an honest mistake? Historians still argue whether Ferdinand's rise to power was coincidence or calculated. But what's clear is that from the moment he was crowned, he made secrecy his closest ally. Secrets became his currency. Some rulers hoarded gold. Ferdinand hoarded silence. This craving for control seeps into every layer of his life. Court painters were instructed never to portray him laughing. Court poets learned quickly not to write of love unless it ended tragically. Even the royal gardens, once wild and overgrown under his father's rule, were trimmed into perfect symmetry, no rose daring to outgrow its assigned square. It's said he even had the gardeners punished for allowing a single ivy vine to wander across the wrong archway. Yet for all this obsession with appearances, Ferdinand's private indulgences bloomed in paradoxical contrast. Enter the velvet hollow, a space entirely his, filled not with symmetry or solemnity, but with colour, softness and movement. In the hollow, Ferdinand could be something else entirely. Not a ruler, but a dreamer, a collector of sensations, and most importantly, a man unbound by duty. It's here, nestled beneath stone and shame, that Ferdinand's true desires take form, not just physical, but psychological. The hollow becomes an extension of his identity, shaped like a sanctuary and curated with near-religious precision. He doesn't just select women, he selects personas. One month, he favours a woman who sings opera in perfect Neapolitan. Another, he's enamoured with a North African dancer whose hands tell stories older than the palace itself. There's even a phase where he becomes enthralled by twin sisters from the Baltic, who spoke only to each other and claimed to dream the same dreams. They didn't stay long. Rumour has it they unnerved him with their laughter. Each concubine becomes a temporary mirror reflecting a version of Ferdinand he wishes to inhabit. The scholar, the warrior, the poet, the lost sailor. They don't just entertain him, they complete him, if only for a night. But like all things too beautiful, it cannot remain unspoiled. The first crack in the hollow's harmony comes not from outside rumours, but from within, through Ferdinand himself. Though he rules his inner kingdom with a velvet glove, the pressure of real kingship begins to wear on him. Wars flare along the eastern border, trade routes falter, a famine strikes the lower provinces, and unrest simmers among the peasantry. Publicly, he holds the line, but in the hollow, the strain seeps through. He grows more unpredictable. Sometimes he doesn't appear for weeks. Other times he storms in unannounced, demanding music, wine and attention, with a hunger that borders on manic. The concubines learn to adapt. Some retreat to their chambers during these storms. Others stay close, hoping to soothe the king's moods and remain in his favour. A hierarchy emerges, unspoken but understood. The favoured are draped in gold and fed first. The less favoured receive cooler glances, fewer summons, and eventually quiet reassignment to other parts of the palace. One concubine in particular begins to rise through this shifting tide. Her name is Lila, slender, sharp-eyed, with a voice that wraps around listeners like smoke. No one quite knows where she comes from. Some say Persia. Others insist she was born to a nomadic tribe and trained in secret to please kings. All agree on one thing: she's different. Lila doesn't laugh at Ferdinand's jokes. She doesn't ask for gifts. She challenges him, not overtly, but with a look, a sigh, a silent pause at just the right moment. Where others flatter, she reflects. Where others fear, she studies. And Ferdinand, ever the control freak, finds her maddeningly irresistible. He starts requesting her company more than anyone else. The hollow adjusts accordingly. Her favourite tea, infused with rose petals and cloves, is suddenly stocked in bulk. Her quarters are redecorated, subtly echoing the tapestries of her homeland. The nightly music changes too, slowing into minor keys, softer tempos, darker rhythms. Of course, this causes tension. The other concubines notice the shift and whisper behind silk screens. A few begin plotting. Not against Lila exactly, but against the system that made her rise possible. Some suggest smuggling letters to the outside world. One even proposes stealing the king's signet ring to fabricate a royal order for their release. The palace above remains oblivious for now. Meanwhile, Ferdinand continues his tightrope walk between dual lives. By day, he holds court with dignitaries, settles disputes, and tours damaged provinces. By night, he descends into the hollow, shedding his royal armour like a snake losing skin. It's during one of these transitions that an accident occurs, minor yet pivotal. The hidden staircase malfunctions. A servant sent to polish the marble floor near the throne accidentally leans on the inlaid gemstone. With a soft whir and click, the floor opens, and the servant catches a glimpse of something no one was ever meant to see. A flicker of candlelight below, the hint of music, the unmistakable scent of cardamom. He says nothing, of course, but his silence is brittle. Within days, a few trusted guards are relocated. A royal chef disappears. One of the hollow's concubines is found crying in her chamber, though she refuses to say why. The air thickens. Secrets, it seems, are like dust. They settle, then swirl up at the slightest disturbance. Despite all this, Ferdinand presses on, unwilling to dismantle his sanctuary. If anything, he retreats deeper into it, isolating himself further from advisors and foreign affairs. His obsession with Lila becomes all-consuming. He gives her a jade pendant said to be carved from the tooth of an ancient sea monster. He writes her poetry, strange and cryptic, filled with metaphors about drowning and fire. He even proposes, though whether the offer was serious or the result of too much wine, no one can say. Lila, ever composed, neither accepts nor declines. Instead, she begins to write as well. Not poetry, but notes. Tiny scrolls of parchment hidden in her robes beneath cushions behind wall panels. She's mapping something, not just the hollow, but the king himself. One day, during a particularly tense evening, Hyla disappears. Her chamber is found untouched. No sign of struggle. No trace of escape. Just the jade pendant on her pillow, coiled like a question mark. Ferdinand is beside himself. For 3 days he refuses to eat. The hollow is locked down. No one enters. No one leaves. The remaining concubines are interrogated, gently at first, then not so gently. Still, no answers emerge. Then, just as suddenly as she vanished, Lila reappears, standing at the edge of the hollow, barefoot, eyes blazing with something unspoken. She says she got lost, that she was exploring, that she simply needed air. Ferdinand believes her, or pretends to, but something between them breaks that night. He stops requesting her company. The nightly music returns to its former tempo. The hollow exhales, uneasy, uncertain. And somewhere above in the palace corridors the whispering begins again. It starts with a draught, cool, unsettling, whispering up through the floor of the throne room like the exhale of a ghost. The same polished stone Ferdinand walks each morning to meet with his ministers now seems to murmur beneath his boots. Servants pause while sweeping, catching the faint scent of clove and rose drifting up from nowhere. One even swears she hears music, though no musicians have been summoned. Ferdinand notices too. Of course he does. Nothing escapes him in the palace. He's shaped like a second skin. But instead of alarm, he feels annoyance. The hollow, once his perfect sanctuary, has become a sieve. The seams are splitting. Control, his most prized possession, is slipping. He calls for the chief architect, a stooped man with a cane and a mind like a chessboard. Together they walk the throne room in silence, heads tilted, listening. The king taps a spot on the marble with his boot. The architect flinches. That, they both know, is the fault line. The problem isn't the hollow, it's the palace above it, aging and burdened by repairs. What was once a fortress is now a slowly sinking museum of past glories. And beneath it all lies a hidden room growing louder in its defiance. Their solution is clever but desperate. The king orders new tiles laid over the throne room's floor, thicker, heavier, etched with intricate designs to draw attention upward. The gem inlay trigger is removed, replaced by a mechanical lever hidden behind a wall tapestry, depicting Ferdinand's coronation. Subtle, secure, but not infallible. Down in the hollow, the changes ripple like tremors. The staircase is now accessible only by 2 people, Ferdinand and a single trusted guard named Thomas, whose silence is as absolute as the grave. The concubines are forbidden to enter the central chamber unless summoned. One corner of the hollow is curtained off entirely, hiding something, perhaps new mechanisms, or perhaps Lila's brief disappearance has left a scar deeper than anyone realized. And then comes the blueprint. It arrives in a scroll tube, delivered to the Royal Library without a name. At first glance, it appears to be a decorative floor plan, an old architectural rendering of the palace from the time of Ferdinand's grandfather. But one junior scholar notices discrepancies, staircases that don't exist, windows where none are visible, and most notably a small square chamber beneath the throne room, marked only by a sigil, a coiled serpent devouring its tail. He shows it to his mentor, a man named Garan, who once dined with kings and now drinks ink like wine. Garen's eyes widen. He recognizes the mark. It's the seal of an old secret society, believed to have served monarchs in building hidden rooms for less than sanctioned affairs. Garan had assumed it was fiction, a medieval joke. But now, staring at this map, the story slithers from fiction into his grasp. Garan becomes obsessed. He requests every floor plan, every renovation record, every scrap of documentation dating back 2 centuries. Piece by piece, he reconstructs a shadow puzzle. Servant corridors that lead nowhere, doors that don't exist. Entire sections of the palace that make no sense unless something is missing in between. He tries to keep his research quiet, but scholars gossip like birds in a bath. Soon, rumours swirl that the palace holds a forgotten room. Some say it was a dungeon. Others, a vault. A few suggest a tomb for a beloved pet lion the first King Ferdinand owned. But Garin knows better. He's seen the sigils. He's read the codes woven into old tapestries, phrases like the silence below the crown and where velvet kisses the stone. Still, without proof, he's just a dusty man with ideas. That proof arrives unexpectedly, hidden in a broken chair. During a restoration of the royal music salon, a workman stumbles upon an old court chair with a false bottom. Inside is a scroll, half destroyed by time but still legible enough to read 3 words, for his pleasure. Beneath it, a name, Lila. Suddenly, Garin has something real, a link between his blueprint and the present king. He knows better than to shout it from the rooftops. Instead, he writes a careful letter addressed to one of the queen's handmaids, an old student of his who now brushes hair and hears secrets. He doesn't accuse, he merely asks, "Has the queen ever spoken of Lila?" She has not. But the name strikes her like a bell. She's heard it before, once, whispered behind the garden hedges during a rare moment of unsupervised gossip among the ladies. The Jade One, they had called her, the one he almost married. The handmaid writes back, "Do not dig deeper." But Garin is already shoveling with both hands. As this scholarly web spins above, below in the hollow, things are changing again. The concubines sense a shift, not just in the king's mood, but in the very air. The nightly music is now played live by a cellist from the royal orchestra brought in under an assumed name. Her playing is impeccable, but she asks too many questions. She watches too closely. One of the concubines finds her rifling through a trunk not her own. She claims it was a mistake. That same night the cellist is gone. Not dismissed, vanished. They never speak of her again. But they do begin to speak. Quietly, in pairs, late at night. They talk of escape. Not dramatic flights through tunnels, but bureaucratic ones. If a concubine became ill, truly ill, she could be released. If she fell out of favour, she might be reassigned. Or perhaps, if she caused enough quiet trouble, she'd be forced out just to avoid drawing attention. One begins to fake fainting spells. Another pretends to go blind in one eye. A third starts reciting religious verses at inappropriate times, alarming the staff. Ferdinand isn't blind to these attempts, but he's too distracted to respond. His focus has returned stubbornly to Lila. She remains aloof, detached. Beautiful still, but now wrapped in a sadness even Ferdinand can't penetrate. He confronts her once, voice taut, asking if she regrets returning. She doesn't answer. Instead, she opens a small wooden box and hands him a piece of folded parchment. It's a drawing. The palace from above. But not as it stands, as it was, before renovations, before secrets. At the centre, a black dot beneath the throne room. Around it, words in Lila's elegant script. Rooms never stay secret forever. Ferdinand is livid. He burns the paper in the hollow's fire pit, the smell of singed parchment joining the ever-present scent of cardamom and rose. But he doesn't discard the box. Elsewhere, Garin is growing bold. He sneaks into the palace archives, something he swore he'd never do. With gloves and a stolen key, he lifts a ledger from the reign of Ferdinand's father. There, in tidy looping script, he finds a record of an unauthorised substructure excavation, signed by a foreman whose name appears nowhere else in royal records. Below that, one line has been scrubbed clean, scraped away. He tilts the page under a lantern. Just faintly, the word hollow appears in ghostly shadow. He stumbles out of the archives at dawn, heart racing. Back in the hollow, Ferdinand does something unusual. He sends away all the concubines for a day. Each is escorted to private quarters above, told they'll return when summoned. Only Lila remains. She's brought to the central chamber, alone. The room has changed again. The mirrors are gone, the tapestries stripped. In the centre, where the divan once sat, there's now a small marble pedestal. Upon it, the jade pendant, and beside it, the wooden box. Ferdinand doesn't speak at first. He simply watches her from the shadows. Then, Softly he says, "I built this to contain beauty, but I see now it only cages it." Lila says nothing. "Why did you return?" he asks. She steps forward. "To remember." They stand in silence. Somewhere above them, footsteps echo faintly across the throne room tiles. The secret chamber no longer hums with the low rhythm of seduction. It vibrates with the tension of an ending not yet spoken aloud. In the hollow, walls that once exhaled warmth now feel colder. The silks and satins rustle less with laughter, more with unease. The air holds a sharpness to it, as if each breath might cut the tongue of anyone foolish enough to utter the truth aloud. The pedestal remains untouched, the jade pendant on display like an artifact from a civilization that forgot how to lie. And Ferdinand, once confident in his control, now paces like a scholar trapped inside his own unwritten footnotes. Layla lingers quietly, her posture unreadable. Every movement she makes feels deliberate, like each flick of her wrist carries meaning he's too proud or too afraid to decode. By nightfall, the hollow is still empty of the others. It becomes a stage, and the king and his muse its reluctant players. But there's no audience left to applaud, and no script to follow. Ferdinand, in an uncharacteristic act of candour, recounts the creation of the hollow. He speaks not as a monarch, but as a man who believed he could craft happiness through architecture. "I thought if I controlled every curve, every corner," he says, "I could protect what I loved from the chaos outside. But it's clear now, even to him, that the hollow has never been a sanctuary. It was a slow-spinning gyroscope balanced on deception, rotating silently until the day it tipped too far." Lila says nothing in response. Instead, she opens the wooden box once more. This time inside is a single white ribbon. It's frayed on one end, as though torn hurriedly from a larger piece. Ferdinand recognizes it immediately. It belonged to a concubine who vanished 3 winters ago, Amara, the violinist with the scar on her left cheek. Officially, she had returned to her family, but no one ever confirmed which family or where. "You knew?" Ferdinand asks, his voice catching on the edge of his throat. "I knew enough," Lila replies. And with that, something ancient inside the king crumbles. Above them, court life goes on, blind to the unravelling below. The queen, regal and sharp-eyed, attends a diplomatic banquet with foreign dignitaries. She smiles with perfect poise, raises toasts with practised grace, and fields compliments in 5 languages. Yet behind her measured glances, her mind buzzes with a single thought. The strange letter she received earlier that morning. It was unsigned, but she knew the handwriting, Garen's. A single sentence. Ask about the jade pendant. That night, the queen walks the palace halls long after the staff retires. Her slippers make no sound against the cool stone, her presence ghostly yet solid. She reaches the royal bedchamber, but Ferdinand isn't there. She already knows where he is. She doesn't descend. Not yet. Instead, she returns to her quarters and opens a cabinet no one else dares to touch. Inside, tucked among coronation memorabilia, lies a small diary. Hers. Flipping to a bookmarked page, she rereads the passage she wrote years ago, after finding a crumpled handkerchief behind the royal mirror, the scent of cardamom and something else, like regret. The hollow has never been hers, but she's always known of it. And now she's decided to act. Elsewhere in the palace, Garen continues his research. His obsession has taken on the flavour of revolution. He now believes the hollow is not just a personal indulgence, but a symbol of corruption rooted deep within the monarchy's foundations. He begins documenting everything: maps, transcripts of overheard conversations, copies of ledger entries. He constructs what he calls the dossier, a damning archive he plans to reveal, not to the court, but to the people. Historians still argue whether Garen's motives were pure. Some claim he simply wanted glory, a place in the annals as the man who unveiled the great royal scandal. Others believe he truly sought justice for the voiceless women hidden below. Whatever the reason, his actions ignite a fuse. Back underground, the concubines are allowed to return to the hollow after 2 days. Their silence during the absence has grown heavy. Some have packed small bags, ready for the worst. Others cling to the hope that the hollow will return to its previous rhythm, controlled, predictable, survivable. But that illusion is shattered when they find the central chamber transformed. The divan is gone, the cushions stripped, the music silenced. Instead, Ferdinand sits in a high-backed wooden chair facing them. Behind him stands Lila, He doesn't summon them, he doesn't speak, he merely watches. One by one they enter, unsure whether to bow, speak, or flee. It feels like a tribunal, or worse, a farewell. Then, with a voice that has sentenced generals and absolved murderers, Ferdinand announces, "This chamber will be closed." No one breathes. You will each be reassigned. Some will return to your homes. Others will receive new appointments within the court. You're not prisoners. You never were. A murmur stirs among the women. Confusion, disbelief, and something dangerously close to relief. Lila steps forward next. This place was built to hide beauty, but in hiding it, it lost its soul. The concubines are dismissed. There are no tears, only quiet footsteps retreating through velvet halls they may never see again. That night, Ferdinand returns to the chamber alone. He stands beneath the polished ceiling and listens, not for music, not for voices, but for emptiness. It answers him, and then he locks the hollow for good. Or so he thinks. The next morning, the Queen calls a meeting with her most trusted advisers. She does not mention the hollow. Instead, she speaks of restructuring palace priorities. She asks for Garan to be brought in, not as a criminal, but as a consultant, and she orders a full architectural review of the palace, for safety reasons. Ferdinand is not informed. What follows is a quiet inquisition. Garan, now officially under royal protection, begins interviewing staff under the guise of historical preservation. One maid reveals she used to prepare exotic oils and perfumes for a private guest. A guard admits he once saw a woman enter the eastern wing through a corridor he never knew existed. The Queen gathers these accounts like beads on a string. She never confronts Ferdinand. She doesn't need to. Then, one afternoon, as construction crews begin sealing off unused corridors, a young stonemason uncovers a wall panel with carvings unlike any found elsewhere in the palace. Beneath the plaster lies a hidden niche. Inside, a bundle of documents, pages of poetry, maps, letters, even a sketch of the hollow itself complete with names and dates. At the bottom, a final note, written in Ferdinand's own hand. They will not forget. So let them remember what I chose to hide. It's unclear whether Ferdinand meant this as confession, defiance, or legacy. That night, Lila disappears for the second and final time. No one sees her leave. No one ever finds her. Ferdinand, upon hearing the news, says only, "Good." The hollow remains sealed, its entrance disguised once more. But stories begin to spread, among staff, among scholars, among visiting dignitaries who claim to feel a strange breeze beneath the throne. The dossier, once kept secret by the Queen, is eventually leaked. Not by her, but by a palace archivist with more ambition than loyalty. It spreads like wildfire. The scandal breaks wide open. Public reaction is split. Some are outraged, disgusted by the decades-long deception. Others romanticize it, imagining the hollow as a palace within a palace, a tragic theatre of forbidden love. Tours of the palace increase. Tourists begin asking, always with a wink, "Where's the velvet room?" Guides deny its existence, of course, but their smiles say otherwise. Ferdinand retreats from public life. He claims illness, but no one truly believes he's dying. He remains in his private chambers, writing letters he never sends, reading books he's already memorized, and occasionally late at night he wanders back to the throne room and stands in the center, eyes closed, trying to remember whether the floor still breathes beneath his feet. They call it the Room of Crimson and Gold now, though in its lifetime it wore no such name. The hollow, as Ferdinand christened it in private, has become the subject of hushed fascination. But in its prime, it was more than a room. It was a theatre of illusion, where pleasure posed as peace and silence passed for loyalty. Beneath its velvet curtains and between its gold-embroidered cushions, a strange world bloomed. A garden of indulgence grown in the dark. The room itself was an exercise in seductive excess. Walls covered in damask fabrics of deep red and shadowed maroon caught the light of oil lamps with a sultry glow. Gold leaf shimmered in the borders of murals depicting scenes not from mythology, but from Ferdinand's own dreams, painted at his instruction, realized by an artist sworn to secrecy. Every brushstroke was designed to remind him not of Olympus or Eden, but of moments he'd imagined, things he believed he could only have if he kept them hidden. The ceiling was domed and dark, its centre adorned with a chandelier shaped like a flowering tree, each glass petal tipped in amber. When lit, It cast patterns across the floor like vines creeping silently across a forest path. Beneath it, the centre of the room unfurled like a stage, cushioned lounges, silk drapery hanging from unseen rings, and a low platform used for music, poetry, or sometimes nothing more than a shared meal between the king and his latest favourite. One might expect cold stone and echoing silence, but the hollow was built to trick the senses. The walls were double insulated to dampen sound, and the air was infused constantly with the signature fragrance Ferdinand preferred, a concoction of crushed clove, rosewater and powdered ambergris. It clung to the skin, the hair, the memory. Servants rarely saw the chamber. Only 3 in the king's lifetime ever entered regularly. 1 to tend to wardrobe, 1 to manage meals, and 1 to keep the hollow clean. They were chosen not for discretion alone, but for having no family ties and no homeland loyalties. And each was eventually rewarded, generously, but always far from the capital, far from the palace, and always with the firmest understanding. Silence was not a choice. It was a condition of survival. What went on inside the hollow was rarely dramatic, at least not in the ways stories would later claim. No bacchanals, no fountains of wine or orgiastic chaos. Ferdinand, for all his secrecy, was remarkably methodical in his decadence. He curated moods like a composer arranges chords. A concubine might be summoned to read him something she'd written. Another to dance. Another still to simply lie beside him as he recited policy drafts aloud, using her presence as a sounding board or perhaps a balm. What he sought was not constant pleasure, but perfect arrangement, a diorama of his inner world, built piece by piece with human players. To be chosen was an honour and a curse, for as quickly as favour was given it could vanish, and then, so might the concubine. Those rooms, there were more than one, extended from the main hollow like fingers from a hand. Each had its own flavour. One was styled after a Turkish boudoir, with hanging lanterns and plush floor cushions. Another took inspiration from northern courts, its wood-panelled walls adorned with furs and ice-blue tapestries. And there was the room no one liked to speak of, the whispering room. Unlike the rest of the hollow, it was nearly bare. Pale walls, pale floor, and a singular chair in the centre. It had no music, no scent, no warmth. It was where the king would go when he didn't want company, only observation. He'd sit, and a concubine would be asked to do the same. No talking, no touching. Just silence, shared for hours, sometimes all night. Some concubines grew to fear that room. Others claimed they felt more seen in its stillness than they ever did while draped in finery. Historians debate the purpose of the whispering room. Was it psychological manipulation, a meditative ritual, or simply the king's way of wrestling his own unrest? One fringe theory, later published in an obscure journal, argued that Ferdinand suffered from a rare form of sensory craving disorder, wherein he derived peace from sensory deprivation followed by overexposure. No one ever proved it, but those who lived in the hollow long enough all agreed. He was not like other men. Not every concubine who entered the hollow remained long. Some left by design, gifts of land, arranged marriages, foreign posts. Others, less fortunate, simply stopped appearing. There was no scream, no blood, no public announcement. Their chambers would be quietly stripped, belongings boxed and stored in a locked room near the palace's west wing. One day they were there, the next a whisper in silk. A particularly chilling anecdote comes from Zaria, a concubine who later became a lady-in-waiting at a distant court. She once described the peculiar tradition that followed a concubine's unexplained exit, the burning of her scent. The hollow's keeper would prepare a blend using the exact fragrance she wore. Each woman had her own, and burn it in the central brazier. The smell would linger for a day, sometimes more, as if her memory needed to be smoked from the stone. To this day, some visitors claim they can catch whiffs of perfume no one in the palace wears. Of course, not everything in the hollow was shadowed by melancholy. There were moments of joy, genuine laughter, shared glances, even friendships formed in the least likely conditions. A few concubines created secret traditions, notes passed between walls, games coded in hand gestures, songs rewritten with playful lyrics whispered at night. They were prisoners, yes, but also performers in an elite troupe, each trained to master illusion and longing. And as for Ferdinand, his moods cycled with the moon. There were weeks he treated the hollow like a monastery, drinking nothing stronger than mint tea and reading aloud from philosophical texts. Then came the opulent phases, nights of candlelit feasts, wine imported from vineyards no longer on maps, dancers from distant cities whose language none of the others understood. But even in his indulgence, he remained obsessed with control. Every cushion's position, every light's brightness, every gesture from the concubines had to flow according to an invisible choreography only he understood. A smile too wide might sour his interest. A hesitation could mean banishment. They learned to read him the way sailors read the sky. One wrong sign, and the storm would come. And yet, beneath it all, Ferdinand believed he was building something noble. Not just a pleasure den, but a perfect world. He once said to one of the few confidants allowed near the Hollow's outer ring, "Up there, they want power. Down here, I just want peace." Whether that peace was mutual or one-sided remains the great question. Over time, as Lila's presence grew, the Hollow subtly reshaped itself. Her scent began to mingle with the air. Her voice, low, deliberate, set the tempo for conversation. Even the other concubines, at first envious, grew to regard her as a kind of compass. She listened. She remembered. She gave them hope that perhaps the Hollow could be more than a stage. It could be a sanctuary. It's Lila who suggested the gardens. They were never real, of course. There was no sunlight in the Hollow, but she had the chamber's eastern wing transformed into an indoor grove. Potted trees, vines trained along copper wires, pools lined with painted stone to mimic natural springs. The king allowed it, perhaps amused, perhaps intrigued, perhaps. For a while the garden became the heart of the Hollow. There the concubines shared meals, stories, songs. It was the closest any of them came to freedom. The garden, however, carried one secret none of the others knew. Beneath a cluster of ferns, behind a false rock, Lila hid a scroll case. Inside, sketches of the Hollow, notes, names, dates, observations of the king's behaviour, patterns in his mood, entries and exits, a full cartography of control. Whether she planned to expose him or simply understand him, no one ever found out. When she vanished, the scroll case remained untouched until the garden itself was dismantled. The room of crimson and gold was never meant to last. Like a fever dream or the final pages of a forgotten novel, it faded into memory, into myth. But while it stood, it was perhaps the truest reflection of Ferdinand himself. Not the throne, not the treaties, not the portraits in royal galleries. Here, beneath the kingdom he ruled, lay the one he built just for himself. And in that red and gold glow, among secrets scented in rose and smoke, lived the man history could never quite explain. In the Velvet Hollow, nothing was random. Even the rules, those invisible bindings that governed every breath and movement, were calculated with meticulous care. Ferdinand didn't just want obedience. He wanted a symphony of order where each concubine played her part in perfect harmony. The Hollow's rules were not etched in stone, nor written in ink, but everyone knew them. They were whispered through smiles, memorised in the flicker of candlelight, and carried in the tilt of a servant's eyes. Rule 1. No one summoned the king summoned you. If your name was spoken by the chamber steward, you followed. If it wasn't, you waited. You waited until the walls felt closer, until the silence echoed too loudly, until you forgot what your voice sounded like in his presence. Even the favourites, Lila, Zaria, Mirelle, abided. Ferdinand never allowed petitioning no matter how long he went without seeing a face. Patience was the first test. Rule 2. Masks at dusk. Each evening after the bells above struck the 8th hour, the concubines wore masks whenever they left their quarters. Each mask was unique, some made of delicate filigree, others of pressed velvet or feathered lace. They weren't disguises, not truly. Ferdinand claimed they were for beauty, for mystery, for art. But the concubines understood the real purpose. In anonymity there was control. No woman could become too familiar, too powerful. Every encounter remained curated, every identity fluid. Rule 3. No one spoke his name in the Hollow, not Ferdinand, not Your Majesty, not even Sire. Here he was called the Listener. It was a poetic flourish he borrowed from an old myth about a god who ruled not by command, but by knowing all things unspoken. It was a performance, like much of the Hollow, but also a shield. By refusing the language of monarchy, he wrapped himself in fantasy. Rule 4. Silence on the stairs. The staircase that descended into the hollow became sacred. Guards flanked the entrance above, but none followed below. Concubines were trained to walk it with bare feet, toes sinking into the red carpet like whispers. It was not uncommon for someone to pause midway down, composing her face, steadying her breath, preparing for whatever version of Ferdinand awaited her at the bottom. The steps were an initiation. They carried fear, anticipation, sometimes dread. Rule 5. No tears. This was the most important and the most cruel. Within the hollow, emotion was permitted only if it pleased the king. If you cried because of a story he told, it was art. If you wept for your home, your past, or a vanished friend, it was considered disobedience. Tears were a breach in the illusion. They shattered the spell, disrupted the aesthetic. More than one concubine learned this the hard way, failing to smile at the wrong moment, or breaking down during one of Ferdinand's elaborate fantasy games. Those women were not punished with rage, but with erasure. Their rooms emptied, their names never spoken again. Among the concubines, these rules were accepted with the resignation of those who knew the cost of rebellion. But not all followed them blindly. Some learned to twist them to their advantage. Take Morel, for instance. She arrived young, barely out of girlhood, and quickly earned a reputation as the porcelain ghost. Her mask, pure white with silver trim, became her symbol. She never spoke out of turn, never laughed too loudly, never stepped out of line. She was, in many ways, the perfect hollow resident. But behind the mask, she was always listening. She memorized every pattern, the timing of meals, the way Ferdinand's preferences shifted with the seasons, which concubines rose or fell in favour and why. She noticed things others didn't, how he always chose a wine 2 days before he made a significant political decision, how he lingered by the garden wing when troubled, how his hands trembled slightly after receiving letters from his cousin in the southern court. Morel became invaluable, not because she sought favour, but because she understood timing. She knew when to speak, when to fall silent, when to vanish just long enough to be missed. She never cried, not even once. And for that, Ferdinand granted her a privilege few others ever received: the key. It wasn't a real key, not one that opened doors. It was a small pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, carved from ivory and hung on a black silk ribbon. Ferdinand gave it to her one morning after she'd spent the night simply sitting beside him, while he read letters in the whispering room. "With this," he'd said, "you may walk the garden after dusk." It was a strange gift, seemingly small. But in the hollow, it was monumental. Freedom of movement, especially at night, was rare. Morel wore the pendant tucked beneath her robe, a symbol of quiet power, and she never misused it. She walked the garden alone once a week, touching the ferns Lila had planted, smelling the starflowers, whispering the names of those who had vanished. And then there were the gestures, the unspoken signals that formed an underground language. A hand resting on the left shoulder meant fear. A folded corner on a tapestry meant a request to meet. 3 beads placed on a vanity meant someone was watching. These codes were never taught. They evolved, passed down in smiles and raised eyebrows. The hollow, for all its control, couldn't stop the women from building their own networks. Yet Rule 6 hovered over all others. No mention of the outside. This was Ferdinand's sternest edict. No concubine was to speak of her life before the hollow. No families, no homes, no languages other than what was spoken here. The outside world was a threat, a reminder that the hollow was not complete, not enough. Ferdinand insisted that by erasing the past they could fully live in the present he had created. But people carry their pasts whether they speak them or not. Dreams betrayed memories, accents slipped during sleep. In stolen moments of solitude, concubines traced letters from forgotten alphabets in the steam on their mirrors. One woman, a tall, proud dancer named Roxana, wore a bracelet of knotted threads. No one understood the pattern until one night, during a thunderstorm, she revealed it was her family's code for their village's name. She wept as she explained, then quickly apologized, fearing punishment. She was gone by morning. Whether Ferdinand exiled her or whether she simply left, no one knew. But her bracelet remained, carefully preserved in the hollow's quiet room, where objects from vanished women were stored, never spoken of but never discarded. Despite these rules, or perhaps because of them, the Hollow developed a strange resilience. Its inhabitants, restricted, masked, silenced, created a culture of resilience. They sang lullabies in languages never heard above ground. They danced in corners no eyes watched. They told stories through gestures, composed poetry in the arrangement of flower petals, wrote messages with hairpins on fabric hems. The Hollow had its own pulse, separate from Ferdinand's, and that frightened him. He began increasing inspections, visiting unannounced, changing protocols without warning. One week, music was forbidden. The next, it was mandatory. He shifted the schedule of meals, altered lighting schemes, removed beloved objects without explanation. The concubines adapted, but something broke. Not visibly, not all at once. But over time, the joy that had lingered like incense began to thin. Conversations dulled. Creativity slowed. Even Layla, once vibrant, walked more slowly now, her eyes less sharp. The rules that once shaped the Hollow's strange beauty became its cage. They stopped feeling like rituals and started feeling like surveillance. And Ferdinand, sensing the change, grew bitter. He accused one concubine of spying, another of plotting escape. He exiled both. When a third wrote a poem referencing the stars, something forbidden as stars existed outside, he tore it up and banned writing for a month. The Hollow turned grey. It remained plush and perfumed, but the spirit had drained. Even Morel, still wearing her crescent key, began to walk more quickly through the garden, as if chased by shadows. Eventually new rules were added. No writing longer than 4 lines. No colours except red, white and gold. No lingering in hallways. No singing unless requested. Each new rule chipped away at the illusion Ferdinand had worked so hard to preserve. The more he tried to control the Hollow, the more fragile it became, and somewhere deep in the walls, behind the murals, beneath the velvet, cracks began to spread. The women waited, not for rescue, not for revolt, but for a moment, any moment, when one rule would finally break itself. And when it did, the entire Hollow would shift. The walls of the Hollow hold more than perfume and silence. They hold whispers. They carry voices that should have stayed hidden, syllables carried through ventilation shafts, secret passageways, and the thin cracks where stone meets wood. Every palace has its echoes, and the velvet Hollow, buried beneath centuries of granite and deceit, whispers the loudest of all. It begins with the guards. The ones stationed nearest to the throne room start noticing anomalies. A shift in temperature underfoot. A trace of music that doesn't come from the royal orchestra. One swears he hears laughter echoing up through the floor. When he investigates, he finds nothing, of course. Just the pristine marble of the throne room and the scent, faint but unmistakable, of jasmine and clove. The guards aren't fools. They know not to question what they're told to ignore, but they talk amongst themselves as guards do, over ale in the mess hall during midnight rotations, in letters to wives who don't ask questions. A name starts to circulate, the Hollow, always in hushed tones, always paired with a glance over the shoulder. Below, the concubines start to feel the shift too, not in the structure, but in the behaviour of those who serve them. The steward, usually brisk and expressionless, begins hesitating before delivering Ferdinand's summons. The kitchen girl, barely old enough to know the world outside, pauses longer when clearing plates, her eyes drifting toward the garden wing. Even Thomas, the king's most trusted guard, lingers a few seconds too long outside the whispering room. It's subtle, but in a world built on performance, the smallest unscripted gesture is a scream. And then, someone new arrives. He introduces himself as a library apprentice, tasked with inspecting the Hollow's textiles for signs of wear. His name is Eland, quiet, wiry, with fingers that linger too long on seams and eyes that dart too quickly when questioned. He doesn't act like a servant. He's too curious, too alert. When he enters a room, he doesn't just admire, he measures. Distances between pillars, angles of mirrors, patterns in the mosaics. The concubines notice immediately. Morel is the first to test him. She pretends to misplace a comb, allowing him into her chamber unaccompanied while she searches. She watches him from a mirror as he kneels beside her vanity and lifts the edge of a floor tile. Not fully, just enough to see the seam. When she clears her throat, he covers it with a practiced smile. But it's too late. She knows. She doesn't report him. Instead, she alerts Lila. Lila listens, nods once, then gives no further indication that anything has changed. But that evening, when the garden is empty and the moon, though unseen, hangs heavy in her thoughts, she places a single note beneath a flower pot shaped like a lion. It's only 4 words in the hollow's hidden language of gestures and omission. He maps. He knows. Days pass. Eland returns, more careful now. He asks fewer questions, but watches more. He compliments a concubine's embroidery, not for its colour, but for its pattern, one that unknowingly mirrors a sigil used in old architectural blueprints. He lingers in the main chamber, counting paces, tracing the light's movement across the walls. One night he leaves behind a scrap of parchment torn and folded containing the beginnings of a floor plan. It finds its way to Thomas. Thomas, who has kept Ferdinand's secrets for a decade, now finds himself in a dilemma. He knows that informing the king will lead to the apprentice's quiet removal, possibly worse. But something about Eland's map feels different. It isn't scandalous. It isn't salacious. It's careful, scholarly. There's no blackmail in it. No threat. Just curiosity. And Thomas, hardened though he is, remembers a time when he too wanted to understand what was behind locked doors. He returns the parchment to Eland's chamber with a single addition. A red dot inked in the corner. Not an accusation. A signal. Eland receives the message. That night he takes a risk. He enters the garden wing after curfew. Maskless. Silent. Waiting there, as if summoned by fate, is Lila. They do not speak. Instead she lifts a lantern and walks. He follows. Through the hollow they move. Not as king and subject, not as hunter and prey, but as 2 people who know the walls around them are collapsing. She leads him to a section long unused. A corridor draped in dust-covered velvet, lit only by memory. At the end stands a mirror, full length, rimmed with pearls gone dull. She taps it once, then twice. The mirror opens. Behind it lies a corridor, narrow and winding, built of unfinished stone and smelling of earth. They step inside. For the first time, Eland sees the true skeleton beneath the hollow's velvet skin. Service tunnels, forgotten chambers, a maintenance alcove with levers controlling the oil lamp system, even a second staircase, unused and hidden behind the laundry room. Lila lets him see. Then, without warning, she closes the mirror and disappears. Eland spends the night sketching everything he remembers. Above them, in the throne room, Ferdinand feels the tremors. Not literally, but emotionally, something is shifting. His favourite concubines are quieter. The meals come colder. The wine he once loved now tastes like rot. He dreams of footsteps behind walls, of eyes watching through mirrors. When he speaks in the hollow, the words feel brittle. He summons Lila. She does not come. He summons Mirelle. She comes, silent and composed, but when he asks her to sing, she declines for the first time. "What is happening?" he asks her. She replies only, "We're listening as you taught us." That night he orders the hollow sealed for a week. No one in, no one out. During that time, rumours spread through the palace above. One maid claims she heard music coming from beneath the floors. Another swears she saw a masked woman in a window that doesn't exist. The guards grow restless. Garan's name resurfaces, along with his dossier. Copies of floor plans are passed around like contraband. The Queen receives a note under her teacup saucer. They are speaking. Soon, everyone will hear. She does not smile, but neither does she panic. Back below, Eland finishes his full rendering of the hollow and its substructures, but he doesn't distribute it. Instead, he does something strange. He adds poetry to it. In the margins, he scribbles verses, observations, descriptions of the women he met, their masks, their laughter, their resistance. It becomes not just a map, but a portrait of a world vanishing before it's fully understood. The final entry reads, "It was never just a room. It was a kingdom of mirrors, and we were all reflections. When the hollow reopens, things are different. The king does not return immediately. The music resumes, but it's quieter now. The concubines walk slower, but taller. And Lila, ever the compass, has vanished again. This time with no pendant left behind, no note, no explanation. Mirelle takes her place as the centre of stillness. Eland is gone, reassigned to a post in the royal archives. But his map remains, hidden in the folds of a curtain, waiting for the next whisper to stir the walls once more. It begins as a game, a passing of time, a small defiance nestled inside the velvet quiet of the hollow. With the king's attention drifting elsewhere and the tension of the chamber pressing down like humid air before a storm, the concubines start writing. Not openly, of course. Writing has always been tightly regulated within the hollow, allowed only under direct instruction from Ferdinand. But rules, like walls, eventually wear thin. It starts with Morel. She uses her mirror. With the edge of a polished bronze hairpin, she etches a symbol in the corner of her vanity mirror. A half moon and 3 dots. A code. It means, meet me after candlelight. She doesn't write it for anyone in particular, not at first. It's a test, a flicker of rebellion. And the next morning she finds an answer. A matching symbol, drawn with powder on the edge of her pillowcase. From there, the messages grow bolder, tucked into slippers, woven into braids, stitched in a single golden thread across the hem of a robe. One message reads, "Do you remember snow?" Another replies, "Only in dreams." A third, stitched into the sleeve of a sleeping robe, says simply, "Still here." These are not escape plans, not yet. They're memories, confessions, moments stolen from the quiet, a refusal to be erased. But then, something changes. A concubine named Celine finds a message unlike the others. Hidden inside a pomegranate left on her bedside table is a scroll. Small, rolled tightly, sealed with wax. She recognizes the seal immediately. It's the king's. The message reads, "Lila did not fall. She climbed. Ask the steward about the stair beneath the whispering pool. It doesn't make sense. There is no stair beneath the pool. The pool, built at Lila's suggestion and designed to mimic moonlight even underground, sits flat against the stone floor of the garden wing. There is no opening, no lever, nothing but smooth rock." But Celine, curious and quietly clever, begins to investigate. She feigns a sprained ankle and lingers beside the pool during cleaning hour. She notices something odd. A series of small, evenly spaced holes around the edge of the stone. Drainage, perhaps, or something else. She shares her findings in the network of coded messages. Within days, 5 more concubines are involved. They take turns observing, noting when the pool is cleaned, how long the water takes to drain, and what tools are used. Then one night, they try. Under the pretense of a group ritual, music and tea beside the water, they distract the steward. Celine crouches by the edge of the pool and presses her fingers against one of the carved stones. It shifts. Beneath it, a mechanism, a slot carved for a key, or perhaps the crescent pendant Ferdinand once gave Morel. Except Morel no longer has it. She gave it away, to someone who needed it more. The pool doesn't open that night, but the network of concubines, once a collection of passive muses, has become something else, a resistance. They begin searching in earnest, and as they search, they discover more than they bargained for. Behind the eastern curtain in the garden room, they find a hidden panel. It contains nothing but a single sheet of parchment and a pressed violet. The parchment is a love letter, written not by Ferdinand, but to him. The handwriting is delicate, looping, unmistakably feminine. It reads, "You built this world for your pleasure, but I found my own power here, not because of your design, but in spite of it. I do not forgive you, but I do remember you. That's more than most kings deserve." There is no signature. Morel keeps the letter, hiding it inside her mattress. Meanwhile, more messages appear. Some arrive with meals, carved into the bottoms of wooden trays. Others are found in the folds of newly delivered linens. One message, burned lightly into the underside of a teacup, simply says, "You are not forgotten." The concubines begin referring to them as feathers, whispers from the outside, soft and easily lost, but undeniably real. They have no idea who is sending them. The steward insists it isn't him. Thomas says nothing, but his eyes seem softer now, his silence less like duty and more like protection. It is around this time that Celine disappears. No one hears her scream. No one sees her leave. Her chamber is left untouched, except for one detail. Her mirror is broken. In the silence that follows, the feathers stop. No new messages, no symbols, no scrolls in fruit or thread in hems. The hollow retreats into itself, wounded. Morel, once the silent observer, becomes the voice of stability. She gathers the remaining concubines each night in the garden wing. They do not speak of escape. They do not speak of rebellion. They sit together, breathing in the scent of the artificial blossoms, waiting. One night, a breeze stirs. There is no wind in the hollow, yet something moves the curtains. Behind one of them, a new message, burned into the stone itself. The Kia's breath, count to 5, step to the 6th echo. They puzzle over it for days, and then one concubine, Tari the youngest, tries it. She walks to the pool, listens closely, counts 5 heartbeats, then steps forward on the 6th echo of a distant drip. The floor clicks, stone shifts, and there it is, a hollow beneath the pool. A set of stairs, narrow and winding, leading down into deeper shadow. They do not descend, not yet. Instead, they cover the opening, replace the stone, say nothing. That night, the music returns. Not from the musicians, from the walls. A melody, slow and haunting, like the lullaby that once played nightly in the early days of the hollow. But this time, it's altered. Slower, in a minor key. The song of a story that no longer wishes to sleep. The women gather. They don't speak. But they all understand. Someone knows. Not just the king, not just the guards. Someone else. Someone above. The next day, Ferdinand returns to the hollow. He's thinner, paler. His presence no longer fills the room like it once did. He walks slowly, not with age, but with something heavier, like carrying the weight of a world he can no longer command. He summons no one. He says nothing. He walks the garden, touches the stone edge of the pool and pauses. His fingers hover where the hidden mechanism lies. Then he walks away. That evening, Thomas delivers a tray to Morel's chamber. On it, beneath the silver lid, a single item, the crescent pendant, untouched since the day she gave it away. No message, just the key. Morel holds it quietly. She doesn't show the others. She doesn't celebrate. She simply places it around her neck, tucks it beneath her collar, and closes her eyes. Above them, in the throne room, a faint creak resounds as if something beneath the marble has begun to breathe again. And somewhere in the palace, Garan places the final page of his dossier into a sealed envelope, addressed not to a court, not to a scholar, but to a printer. The title, beneath the crown, The Hollow Monarchy. He smiles, not with triumph, but with quiet sorrow. History, he knows, is never just fact. It's a love letter written in secret, folded into silk, and passed from hand to trembling hand, until finally someone dares to read it aloud. Garan always believed in puzzles. As a boy, he'd spend hours fitting shards of broken tiles into imagined mosaics, inventing patterns where none existed, insisting that somewhere, if he could only shift the pieces just right, a secret would reveal itself. That instinct never left him. And now, years later, he stares down at the final page of his manuscript and feels the old fire, the quiet certainty that he's nearly solved something no one else dared try. The dossier is done, bound in plain linen, stamped not with his name but with a symbol, a spiral, Ferdinand's sigil, distorted, broken at its curve. He doesn't plan to publish under his own title. This truth isn't his. It belongs to the nameless, the voiceless, the vanished. He sends it by courier, not to a single publisher but to 3, one in the capital, one in a border town where censorship moves more slowly, and one to a woman he once loved, who now runs a small press known for producing heretical poetry and censored religious texts. She'll know what to do. Then Garan waits. Back in the palace, the hollow stirs. The women, no longer just concubines, gather beneath the surface like the deep waters of a quiet sea. The pool remains unopened since the night they discovered the stair. The crescent pendant, still hidden beneath Morel's robe, feels heavier by the day. It isn't time yet. Not quite. They sense it, like a tide waiting for the moon's signal. But the hollow is not still. The steward fidgets during meal service. A tapestry is removed, then rehung, then removed again. 2 concubines are summoned above for new appointments, a rare occurrence that once would have stirred whispers of favour or disgrace. Now it feels like evacuation, quiet, surgical, as if someone is moving chess pieces before the board is swept away. That someone is the queen. She no longer pretends not to know. The rumours, the dossier, the odd echoes beneath the marble, she collects them all like coins in a velvet pouch. She doesn't confront Ferdinand. She doesn't need to. He's already begun unravelling. He no longer enters the hollow. He sits alone in his chambers, dictating letters to foreign ambassadors who no longer respond. He scratches nonsense into his journal, lists of names, real and imagined, all circled and crossed out, as though hunting for a culprit he cannot name. He dreams of Lila every night. In one dream she stands at the edge of the garden pool, not looking at him, but at the stars which somehow glow underground. In another, she walks away, barefoot and smiling, leaving no footprints behind her. He wakes, clutching his chest, as if trying to keep something inside from escaping. Down below, the concubines begin writing again, not just symbols and notes, but full letters, poetry, testimonies. One writes the names of every woman who ever lived in the hollow that she can remember. Another, a song. Another, a play in which the king never speaks, only listens, until finally the silence consumes him. They hide the writings in odd places, behind stone tiles, inside hollow chair legs, sewn into the hems of curtains, a hidden archive, a future excavation. They're no longer hiding from the king. They're preparing for what comes after. It arrives sooner than expected. One morning Thomas appears in the garden wing, no tray, no orders, just a look. He approaches Morel and says, "Tonight, that's all." That evening the music does not play. The lights are dimmer, the steward is absent, and the guards, always stationed at discreet checkpoints throughout the hollow, have vanished. At the centre of the garden the concubines gather. Morel steps forward, the pendant in her hand. The crescent glows faintly in the lamplight. She presses it into the groove beside the pool. A soft click. Stone shifts. The stair opens. They descend. It's not a tunnel of escape. Not exactly. The steps lead downward, then split. One path leads into what appears to be an ancient storage corridor, lined with crates, long-forgotten tools, and remnants of renovations from decades ago. The other, narrower, slopes gently upward. They choose the second. At the end is a door. Wooden, old, with a rusted handle and no lock. Morel opens it. Light floods in, not sunlight but lamp glow, diffused and warm. They're in a servants' corridor above ground near the palace kitchens. They've risen from beneath the garden into the spine of the palace itself. They stand in silence, the realization settling over them like dust. They could walk away now, but they don't. Not yet. Instead, they retreat. Back through the tunnel, back into the hollow. They reseal the stair. They return to their chambers. This was never about escape. It was about proof, and the proof has been found. The next morning Garen's dossier is published, not in one city, but 3. The title spreads quickly. Beneath the crown, the hollow monarchy. It explodes like thunder across the empire. The text is careful. No names of current officials, no calls for revolution. Just facts, testimonies, architectural renderings, and excerpts from the letters found in the hollow. Some believe it instantly. Others call it a lie. But the impact is undeniable. Questions are raised in court. Whispers rise to a roar. Protesters gather outside the palace gates with signs reading, "Open the hollow. Where are the women? Truth beneath the throne." Inside, Ferdinand says nothing. He doesn't eat. He doesn't speak. He sits in his study, staring at a single line in the manuscript that someone has dared to leave on his desk. He listened to everything but the truth. It's unsigned. In the hollow, the women prepare. They know it won't last much longer. Already, work crews begin sealing corridors. The steward vanishes. The food grows sparse. One morning the tapestries are removed. The night after that, the velvet cushions. Then, a messenger arrives. He carries a decree, signed by the Queen. The hollow is to be dismantled. Officially, it's a structural hazard. Unofficially, it's an erasure. A final attempt to smother the scandal before it ignites into something uncontainable. But the concubines don't resist. They nod. They pack. They leave. Each is granted a modest pension, a new name, and the freedom to choose where to go. Some remain nearby, ghosts in the same city that once whispered their names. Others vanish to distant provinces, changing not just their lives, but their histories. Morel is last to go. She walks the hollow one final time, touches the walls, reads the last messages etched in dust. At the garden pool she kneels and opens the stair once more. She drops the crescent pendant inside, watches it fall into the dark and closes the stone. Then she walks out, unmasked, unafraid. Above her, the throne room echoes with emptiness, and behind her, the hollow exhales its final breath. The palace throws a masquerade, not for joy, not to celebrate, but to distract. The timing is suspicious. Just weeks after Garan's dossier sets the capital ablaze, the royal court declares an extravagant ball. Costumes, fireworks, and guests from every noble house still loyal to the crown. The king himself is said to be too ill to attend, but his signature appears at the bottom of every invitation, written in a hand that trembles slightly more than before. The queen oversees the preparations with clinical precision. The ballroom is transformed into a temple of shadow and gold. Walls draped in black velvet, chandeliers dim to mimic starlight, and performers brought in from the furthest reaches of the kingdom to enchant, bewilder, and distract. It works, for a time. The nobles dance, the wine flows, and the musicians play louder than the murmurs of unrest. But below the marble floor, behind the glitter and applause, the hollow simmers. Despite the official order of closure, the hollow hasn't been sealed yet. Work is delayed, or perhaps quietly sabotaged. And in this window of strange twilight, between exposure and erasure, something ignites. While guests above whirl in silks and laughter, a very different gathering begins below. It isn't a rebellion. Not exactly. It's a reckoning. Morel returns, not as a concubine, but as a ghost. She's not the only one. Word has spread, and several of the former women of the Hollow, those who once sang, danced, soothed, and suffered, have found their way back, disguised as servants, musicians, seamstresses. No longer under his power, no longer under his gaze. They move freely now, masked like the guests above, but with a clarity of purpose that no masquerade can dull. They meet in the whispering room. The room hasn't changed. Pale walls, single chair, quiet as ever. But now it feels like a courtroom, or an altar. Each woman brings something. Zarya carries a silver scarf, the one she wore the night Ferdinand first asked her to sing. Tari brings a bowl filled with water from the garden's pool, its surface rippling with unseen tremors. Morel opens her palm and reveals a torn strip of Lila's robe, the deep green one embroidered with tiny gold leaves. No one asks how she found it. They all know it must have been hidden, waiting. They sit. They do not speak. And as the clock above strikes midnight, a sound begins to rise from the walls. Not music. Footsteps. The masquerade above has reached its crescendo. Guests spin beneath mirrored ceilings, masks flushed from wine, unaware that something beneath their feet is changing. Thomas arrives. He's no longer in uniform, no more medals, no more sword. He wears only a plain black coat and eyes filled with something unreadable. He hands Morel a note. She reads it silently, then burns it in the whispering room's lone candle. No one sees what it said. But after she stands, and leads them not up, but deeper in. The stair beneath the garden pool is open again. This time, they don't hesitate. They descend. The lower chamber, long ignored even by the king, holds the oldest part of the hollow. Here, the walls aren't covered in silk. The stone is raw, the air damp. It smells of iron and damp parchment. This is the room where it began. Before the velvet, before the mirrors. A bare space, used for construction planning and early rituals of secrecy. Forgotten, then repurposed. They light lanterns. In the flickering glow, they begin to write. Not in ink, not on paper. They etch. Using old hairpins, bits of metal, sharpened stones, they carve their stories into the walls. One by one. They don't sign their names. They don't argue over space. They write wherever their hands land. Some carve memories. Others, names of lost friends. One writes a list of rules, then crosses out every single one. Morel, last, carves a spiral, like Ferdinand's seal, but hers ends in a flame. Then they leave. Quietly, carefully. Each woman takes a different path out of the palace, some through servant corridors, some through garden gates. No one sees them, or if they do, they say nothing. Above, the masquerade ends. The queen retires early. Ferdinand, locked in his chamber, never knew they returned, but he will know something happened. The next morning, Thomas delivers a bundle to his door. Inside, a piece of the whispering room's chair, burned, blackened, still warm. Wrapped around it, a silk ribbon from Lila's favourite fan. Ferdinand doesn't scream, he doesn't cry, he simply walks to the window, opens it for the first time in weeks and listens. In the garden, the pool ripples, though no wind moves through the trees. The hollow is empty now. Officially it is condemned. The palace releases a statement about structural damage and renovation. No one believes it, but no one can prove otherwise. Still, the story spreads. A servant in the ballroom claims to have seen masked figures vanish through a wall. A musician swears she followed a corridor that wasn't there before and returned with a red ribbon tied around her wrist. Even a young nobleman, drunk and swaggering, insists he heard singing from the floorboards during the masquerade, a voice he described as grieving and glorious. The hollow, once buried in secrecy, is now a legend. Garan, hearing these tales, smiles. His dossier has gone into a second printing. University students now debate its pages. Tour guides hint at hidden doors. Tourists ask if they can see the concubine room. The palace says it never existed. But a few, the curious and the brave, sneak away from their tours and tap on marble walls, hoping for the whisper of a reply. Sometimes they hear it. Back in the city, Morel opens a school. Not for music, not for dancing, for writing. She teaches young girls to tell stories no one else believes. She encourages them to etch their names into walls if no one will remember them. One student asks if the hollow was real. Morel only says, "We built something that they tried to forget." She never mentions the king. Ferdinand lives another 5 years. He never leaves the palace again. When he dies, his will is sealed for weeks. But eventually one line becomes public. "Bury me beneath the throne, where I can still listen." The request is denied. He is interred in the royal mausoleum, alongside ancestors who ruled more openly, if not more kindly. And the hollow? It remains, sealed, supposedly. But late at night, when the wind is right, some say the palace still hums, not with ghosts, but with memory, a memory that refuses to be silenced. Jealousy has no shape in the hollow. It slithers between silks, whispers behind mirrors, hides in the scent of shared perfume. It doesn't announce itself, but it festers, quiet, corrosive, ever-present. In a place designed to blur identities and orchestrate desire, jealousy becomes the only emotion that dares to speak in full voice. The tension begins with a cup of wine. It is a crimson vintage, imported from a northern vineyard whose grapes grow on volcanic soil. Rich, deep, with notes of ash and cherry. The king's favourite. That night, it is served only to Morel. The others notice. Zaria, who has not been summoned in over a month, stares at the wine with eyes heavy and dark. She was once the favourite, praised for her voice and poise. Now she spends most nights walking the garden paths alone. Roxana, once too fierce to care for rivalry, watches from a distance, her fingers tapping a rhythm of quiet irritation. Even Tari, young and usually naive to such things, senses the imbalance. Morel, for her part, says nothing. She sips the wine and lets it sit like a weight on her tongue. Later that evening, when Ferdinand appears, he speaks only to her. He asks for her poem, the one she started weeks ago but had not yet finished. She reads it aloud, softly, her voice like water against glass. It's about a tree that blooms underground, fed not by sun but by memory. As she speaks, the room falls silent. Even the servants pause. It's beautiful, terrible, true. Afterward, Ferdinand dismisses the others. That's when it begins. Small things, a missing hairpin, a ripped hem, a bruised wrist, explained away with a smile. The women say nothing, but the air changes. One night Zaria confronts Morel, not with words, but with a song. It's an old melody, sharp and bright, filled with biting irony. She sings it during the evening gathering in the garden wing, her voice rising like a blade. The lyrics speak of a woman with a silver tongue who weaves poems to poison kings. Ferdinand is not present, but everyone else hears. They understand. Morel bows her head slightly, a gesture of neither shame nor surrender. Later, in her chamber, she finds a pomegranate on her pillow. Inside is a note. The sweetest fruit rots fastest. The rivalry escalates. Morel begins sleeping with her door locked. Not standard practice in the hollow, where privacy is more an idea than a guarantee. Roxana stops speaking entirely, her silence louder than any accusation. Tari, caught in the middle, tries to mediate with gifts and notes, but only succeeds in drawing suspicion herself. Then, During one of the weekly poetry readings, the wine is served again, this time to everyone. Zarya drinks deeply, so does Roxana. Morel hesitates. The steward watches her carefully. She notices. Still, she drinks, slowly. The music plays. The night continues. No one falls. Not yet. But that evening, Roxana does not return to her room. She's found the next morning collapsed in the garden, unconscious but breathing. A healer is summoned, one of the few ever allowed into the hollow. He finds no sign of illness. No wound, just a strange lethargy, as if her body has decided to retreat without warning. She sleeps for 2 days. During that time, no wine is served. The others grow quiet again. Suspicion simmers, but no accusations are made. Not allowed. On the third night, Roxana wakes. Her eyes are clear, but she says nothing about what happened. Only one sentence, repeated twice. The pool is not just water. Morel visits her. They speak softly, without the barbs that once hung in every glance. Roxana asks, "Did you write the note?" Morel shakes her head. "Number, but I read it." A strange alliance begins to form. Not friendship, something harder, like cold glass forged in fire. They begin to watch together, to compare notes, who delivers the meals, which flowers are fresh cut and which are reused, how many steps it takes to walk the length of the garden when the pool is drained. They notice patterns and anomalies. One concubine, Lienne, never eats in public. Another, Felicie, has not spoken since the masquerade. A third, whose name is only ever whispered, Nava, has never been seen without her mask. They begin to suspect something larger, a structure of favours and punishments, rewards doled out like coins at a gambling table, influence shifting in invisible hands, and always the king at the centre, unmoved. But perhaps not unmoved. Because one evening Ferdinand does something new. He brings a guest. A woman, tall, cloaked, face veiled, introduced only as the archivist. She walks with slow, measured grace and carries a black book bound in scarlet thread. She does not speak for the first hour. Then she begins asking questions, not to the concubines, but to Ferdinand. What was her name? When did she arrive? Why did she leave? He answers, always the same. I don't remember. The concubines listen from behind curtains, from the shadows, from the silence they've mastered. The archivist turns a page. Do you remember what she gave you? Another pause. No. The archivist looks up. Her eyes meet Morel's through a crack in the curtain. She smiles. That night the hollow feels colder. Tari finds another note in her slipper. This one says, "Only the forgotten are safe." The jealousy, once sharp and bright, now dissolves into something more dangerous. Fear, not of one another, of being erased. They begin to document. In secret, each woman begins to write. Not poetry, not art, but memory. Names, events, details, things that might otherwise vanish. They trade pages, hide them, in cracks, in candle bases, beneath floorboards. It's no longer a rivalry, it's a record. One morning, Zarya is gone. No explanation, no warning. Her chamber is emptied before dawn, but in the whispering room, carved into the chair's leg, Morel finds a new phrase, etched in haste, not poetic, just clear. Poisonous silence. Speak. She traces it with her fingertip. Then, for the first time in weeks, she writes a new poem. This one is not about trees or memory. It's about fire, and how sometimes, to remember, you must burn everything first. She's known only by one detail, the jade anklet. It is not large or gaudy, not adorned with bells or charms, just a simple circle of smooth green stone, worn around the left ankle of a girl who speaks little and watches much. Her name, at least to the others, is Leora. But even that is uncertain. She arrives late in the Hollow's timeline, after the masquerade, after the publication of the dossier, after the beginning of the unravelling. By then, the Hollow is less a pleasure chamber, and more a theatre waiting for its final curtain. Ferdinand, withdrawn, speaks only when necessary. The music is inconsistent. Servants rotate with unusual speed, and the women left behind walk with steps heavy with memory. Leora is different. She does not enter timidly, nor boldly. She simply moves as though she belongs, not as a courtesan, but as a witness. Her gaze is steady, her smile rare, and her silence not the result of fear but of calculation. She's not favoured by the king. She's not summoned often. But she begins to map the hollow, not on paper, not openly, but in her steps. She counts tiles, follows candle smoke, times the intervals between door closings, watches shadows. Her jade anklet becomes a metronome, clicking softly as she walks, always barefoot, always measuring. The others notice. Morel, now the quiet heart of the hollow's remaining inhabitants, studies her for days before speaking. Their first conversation is simple, just a comment about the colour of the water in the garden pool. But Leora's reply is curious. It looks shallow, but it hides the shape of the room. She doesn't elaborate. That evening she leaves a flower outside Morel's door, a white camellia. In the hollow's hidden language it means, I see what you've hidden. Forsha. And just like that, a silent alliance forms. Together, though they rarely speak, they begin exploring parts of the hollow even Morel hasn't dared return to. Old servant roots, storerooms with rusted hinges, the remnants of rooms once sealed, then unsealed, then sealed again. Leora is precise. She notes the width of beams, the pattern of ventilation holes, the changing acoustics in different halls. She hums, very faintly, to track the way sound bounces. She claims it helps her find hidden curves. Then, one night, she vanishes. Her chamber is untouched. Her robe remains folded, but the anklet, always worn, never removed, is missing. It is found 3 days later, not in her room, in the whispering room, balanced perfectly on the edge of the chair. No one knows how it got there. The room had been locked, no concubine had access, and yet the anklet gleams as if freshly polished, catching the light like a warning. Whispers spread, not just among the concubines, but through the palace above. A guard claims to have seen a girl fitting Leora's description walking across the west balcony, 3 levels above where she was allowed to go. A kitchen boy swears he found a scrap of her robe in the pages of a library book on royal architecture. The Queen, reading a report filed in haste by a junior steward, frowns at the mention of a girl with an anklet who asks questions she shouldn't know to ask. But none of this is verifiable. Leora has become a ghost. Her absence disturbs Ferdinand, not because he misses her, he hardly knew her, but because she should not have vanished. No one leaves the hollow without his permission. He asks Thomas if anyone was removed recently. Thomas lies. No one. The king doesn't press further, but he begins to patrol the hollow again, alone. The others watch him as he walks the halls. He touches the walls now, as if unsure they're real. He speaks under his breath, sometimes in languages the concubines don't recognise. He lingers by the whispering room but never enters. In her absence, Leora becomes mythic. Some believe she escaped. Some believe she was taken. Some think she never existed at all. That she was a plant, sent by the Queen, or by Garan, or by a foreign power. But Morel knows the truth is stranger. One night, she opens a hidden panel in her chamber wall, a panel only she and Lila ever used. Inside, she finds a piece of parchment. On it, a sketch of the hollow, precise and detailed. Rooms marked, airways traced, exit points noted. In the bottom corner, a single word. Breathe. No signature, just that word. And beneath it, a faint green smudge. Jade. Morel folds the paper and hides it. She begins walking the hollow again, following Leora's map. She discovers a corridor she'd never seen. A ventilation tunnel hidden behind the eastern mosaic, narrow enough to crawl through, lined with dusty lanterns that flicker even without a flame. At the end of the tunnel is a door, not wood, not velvet, steel. It's locked. Of course, but etched beside it in the soft limestone of the wall is an inscription. It reads, "The room with no name remembers every voice." Morel touches it and feels warmth. She returns to the others, tells them nothing, not yet. Instead, she begins teaching them what she learned from Leora. Not maps, not symbols, but how to listen to the hollow, to its breath, to its sighs, to its memory. They begin practicing silence and shifts, not just out of obedience, but to hear. And in the quiet, they notice things they never did before. The rhythm of the dripping water, the way a door creaks slightly more when someone lies. the subtle shift in air pressure when a hidden passage opens. Leora taught them more in absence than she ever did in presence, and that, perhaps, is her greatest gift. Then, one morning, the pool in the garden glows, not brightly, just faintly, but enough to draw every woman from her room, barefoot, robe-clad, silent. They gather. The water shimmers, and on its surface, as if drawn by invisible fingers, words appear, not carved, not floating, reflected. The door opens only for those who forget what they were told to remember. They do not understand, not fully, but they do know one thing. The hollow is not done with them, nor is Leora. And somewhere, beneath the stone and behind the silence, her jade anklet still sings. The disappearances begin quietly. At first, they're spaced out, days or even weeks between them, like raindrops before a storm. No announcement, no ceremony, no farewell. A woman is there one evening, brushing her hair beside the garden pool, humming a tune that's been passed from one resident to another, and the next morning her chamber sits empty, robe folded neatly, lantern snuffed, slippers aligned as if she simply stepped out for tea. But she doesn't return, the others whisper. At first the stories are simple. Reassignment, perhaps. Relocation to another wing of the palace, or release under the king's quiet discretion. That's how it had always worked, hadn't it? A gift of freedom disguised as royal benevolence. But then, someone vanishes who should not have vanished. Felice. She's not among the newest nor the oldest. She was quiet, reliable, observant. She rarely spoke, never challenged the rules, and yet she knew everything. Who favoured what perfume? Which guards changed shifts early? How to read the mood of the king from the way his footsteps echoed in the halls. And then one evening Felice is gone, her bed unslept in. No sign of removal, no whisper of dismissal, just silence. That same night the Hollow's nightly music doesn't play. It resumes the following evening, but something in its tone has shifted. Less melodic, more mechanical, as if a phonograph left to wind down on its own. After Felice, two more vanish in quick succession. No warning, no explanation, no trace. Their names are not spoken again. The concubines, those who remain, begin to grow restless. They stop sleeping at night, choosing instead to gather in pairs and threes in the garden wing or the antechamber near the murals. They talk without talking, eyes meeting, fingers tapping secret rhythms, robes brushing as they pass one another with purposeful slowness. They are watching. They begin counting the staff. The steward who once served them tea no longer appears. The older laundry girl with the limp, gone. The boy who swept the halls and sometimes slipped notes beneath doors, replaced. Even Thomas is absent for 3 days straight. When he returns, he has a scar on his jaw and won't speak of it. Morel decides it's time. She retrieves Leora's map, the one etched with surgical precision, and gathers the remaining women beneath the stained glass lantern in the reading room. It's the only room with a ceiling tall enough for their whispers to feel free. She spreads the parchment on a low table and traces a line with her finger. This, she says, is the way out. They lean in. The tunnel behind the mosaic, the steel door, the inscription etched into the limestone. It had been tested. It had not opened. But Leora's final message, the door opens only for those who forget what they were told to remember, had never been decoded. Morel thinks she knows now. It's not a code, she tells them. It's a command. They must shed the rules, all of them. They must forget the mask, the silence, the endless rituals designed to turn them into ornaments of desire. They must unlearn the choreography the king built around them. Only then will the hollow yield. So they begin. The next morning none of them wear masks. They speak at meals, openly, without permission. They begin to call each other by full names, real names, and some that had never been spoken since their arrival. One woman sings in a language no one recognizes, her voice rising raw and clear above the tiles. Another, a weaver, unravels every curtain in her chamber and braids the silk into a long cord, then knots it into a symbol older than the kingdom itself. They repaint the garden walls using crushed fruit and ash, their fingers tracing shapes that tell stories in colour. The hollow begins to feel less like a room and more like a heart, beating again after years of sedation. And then the king returns. He doesn't knock. He walks into the hollow without announcement, without ceremony, just a man alone in a room he no longer commands. He stands in the garden wing beneath the lanterns that have been dimmed by design, and watches as the women ignore him. No one bows, no one kneels, no one rushes to serve him tea. For a moment he says nothing. Then, softly, he murmurs, "You've forgotten who you are?" Morel answers, "No, we've remembered." He does not respond. He walks past them, through the chamber, past the whispering room, and into the antechamber where Layla once stood. He remains there for a long time. When he returns to the surface, he issues a decree. The hollow is to be sealed immediately. All residents relocated to new posts. Any materials left behind, clothing, letters, artifacts, are to be incinerated. The order is delivered with cold efficiency. The Queen, notably, does not countermand it. And so the final vanishings begin. One by one, the concubines are escorted out, told nothing, handed travelling cloaks, and ushered into silent carriages bound for unknown places. Morel waits. She is the last. She walks the hollow one final time, placing small stones at corners only she knows to mark what has passed. She leaves behind the map, folded into the chair of the whispering room. When Thomas comes to fetch her, he doesn't speak. But as she steps into the hallway, he slips a piece of paper into her hand. Later on the road, she reads it. It says, "The steel door is open." She smiles. Back in the hollow, workmen arrive. They seal entrances, demolish delicate corridors, whitewash murals. But they never find the steel door. They never find the inscriptions. They never hear the final note that plays through the chamber on the last night. The melody, rewritten by the women, altered to carry their voices, a song of escape masquerading as surrender. The hollow is gone. But the disappearances don't end, because the women reappear, quietly, deliberately, in other courts, other cities. A singer with eyes like fire performs a song never heard before in a theatre by the sea. A healer in the north speaks in riddles and wears a single jade bead around her neck. A woman opens a school for girls in the desert, teaching them how to read air and silence and secrets. They are not exiles. They are not survivors. They are architects. And though no one names the hollow aloud anymore, it lingers, like perfume in stone, like a song without words. It lives in every corridor that hides something sacred, and in every silence that waits to be broken. Midnight settles over the palace like spilled ink, soaking into crevices that sunlight never reaches. It is the kind of night that holds its breath, where the air seems too still, and every flicker of candlelight stretches longer than it should. Somewhere within those shadows, a set of footsteps echoes without rhythm, deliberate, silent, slippered. It is the Queen. She walks without guards, wrapped in a robe of muted lavender, her silver hair braided into a crownless coil. Her face, serene by day, is unreadable now, carved into stoic grace through decades of expectation. In her hand, a single object, a small ring of old iron keys, their teeth dulled by time. She does not hesitate. For years she has ignored the hollow. Not out of ignorance. No, she has always known. Knew since the second year of her marriage, when she discovered the chamber's scent in a robe that had no business smelling of cardamom. Knew from the changes in her husband's voice, from the vanished handmaidens, from the sounds she once heard echoing through the palace stones when everyone else slept. She knew, and she waited. But tonight, she chooses not to wait. She opens a door behind the tapestry of St. Aragon's coronation, a woven image of a man she once respected, now reduced to thread and dust, and steps into a corridor long believed closed. The hollow is supposed to be sealed. Officially, the entrance has been buried under new stone, the throne room floor relaid with heavier marble, no more trapdoors, no more mechanisms, the king's final decree. But the Queen knows better than to believe in finalities. She moves with certainty. The door gives easily. The hinges, oiled in secret by someone loyal to memory, do not creak. Inside, the air is heavy. Not stale. No, the hollow breathes still. Slowly. Like an animal hibernating. The velvet has been stripped. The cushions gone. The mirrors covered with canvas sheets. But the structure remains. The bones of it. She walks through it like a funeral procession. Her fingers trail over walls that once heard things she was never meant to know. Laughter. Weeping. Poetry. Betrayal. The seduction of 1,000 illusions, and then she reaches the garden. The pool lies still, no longer perfumed, no longer warm, but the lanterns, 2 of them, still burn. She kneels, removes her slippers, and steps into the water. It is cold, icy, but clear. She closes her eyes. In the silence a voice surfaces, not external, but her own, remembered from years ago. I will not interfere, but I will not forget. She had spoken it once to her mirror after discovering the first list of names. Names of girls who had once served in her court, now vanished, their fates unknown. She burned the list, not out of denial, but as a vow. She hears that voice now and smiles, just faintly. Then, from the edge of the garden, another voice stirs. I didn't think you'd come. It's Morel, not a ghost, not a memory, not a trespasser, just a woman who refuses to disappear. The Queen turns, calm as moonlight. You knew I would, she replies. They say nothing for a moment, only share the silence like old co-conspirators. Morel steps forward, no longer in hollow robes, but in the dress of a scholar. Practical, dark, with ink stains along the cuffs. She carries a book. Its cover is blank, its pages filled. I wrote it, she says simply. The Queen nods. I know. She accepts the book with both hands as if receiving a child and presses it to her chest. It's not just about the king, Morel adds. No, the Queen agrees. It's about all of us who allowed the silence. Then she opens the book. The first page bears a single line, handwritten in delicate script. Let this not be buried beneath another crown. They sit beside the pool and read together. Page after page, story after story. Each name etched with care. Each chamber described with ruthless precision. Poetry woven between testimonies. A history written not for court approval, but for those who had lived it. Morel turns to the Queen once the final page is turned. Will you preserve it? The Queen looks toward the high, domed ceiling, where the stars once painted in gold are now faded to dust. I will hide it, she replies, in the only place no one will search. Beneath her own chamber, she knows, is a vault meant for family heirlooms. Coins, jewels, diplomatic gifts too valuable or embarrassing to display. She will place the book there, wrapped in oilskin, shelved between the lies. Then, when her time ends, she will leave instructions, not for destruction, but for release. She rises and takes one last look at the pool, which no longer reflects faces, only light. Will you stay? She asks. Morel shakes her head. My part here is done. The Queen nods again and begins to walk back through the hollow, but before she disappears she turns once more. There's something you should know, she says. Morel waits. Your name was never on his final list. Morel furrows her brow. What list? The ones he feared, the ones he asked the steward to watch. He had names, symbols, drawings, but not you. Morel lets the silence settle before she answers. That's because I wasn't his to fear. The Queen nods once more, then vanishes down the corridor. Morel remains a while longer. She writes a final message in the dust by the pool's edge. We remembered for you. Then she too departs. The hollow, for the first time in its long tangled life, is truly empty. But above, in the palace, changes begin. A court directive authorises the archiving of unclassified royal architecture. A historian from a distant university is invited to inspect a forgotten wing. A marble slab in the throne room is quietly removed for maintenance. And the book? It waits. Tucked between a necklace once given to a queen and a dagger too elegant to be used, it rests in shadow. A witness, a promise, a seed. And beneath the palace something shifts again. Not physically, not structurally, but in memory. Because the Queen, when she ascends to her room that night, orders her chamber doors left open. For the first time in decades, she sleeps in silence, not guarded by secrets, but by truth. The bells toll twice. No one expects it. The palace bells, tuned to mark only sunrise, sunset, and royal funerals, ring out in the thick of a mid-morning fog. Once, then again, louder, slower, more deliberate than tradition allows. In the upper balconies, servants pause. Courtiers glance toward the windows. No one knows what it means. Not yet. But the hollow does. The toll wakes something. Not the people, they are already awake, but the memory. The resonance of the sound vibrates through the marble, through the floors, through the seams where the sealed corridors meet the throne room. Dust trickles from cracks no longer visible to the naked eye. And then the second echo, deeper, older. Something has been found. It begins in the archive room beneath the west wing, a chamber rarely used, home to brittle scrolls and unread genealogies. A historian named Ellereth, recently assigned to the palace's restoration committee, uncovers a thin, lacquered box tucked behind a false panel. It is unmarked. Inside, a scroll. The scroll, once unrolled, reveals not words, but diagrams. An exact rendering of the hollow, not poetic, not metaphorical, architectural. It bears the official seal of Ferdinand's grandfather, and a warning penned in faded ink. Access forbidden without crown approval. Violators subject to erasure. The discovery sparks chaos. Ellereth, trembling with excitement, reports it to her superior, who attempts to confiscate the box. She refuses. Instead, she makes copies. Within a week, whispers move through the royal city like wildfire dressed in velvet. The hollow is real. Not just legend. Not just whispered scandal. Real. Measured. Documented. The royal court, caught flat-footed, releases a statement that several blueprints of an unused chamber have been misinterpreted, but few believe it. The Queen remains silent. Then comes the tipping point. A young servant, newly assigned to cleaning the eastern gallery, discovers a panel in the mosaic wall that gives way to pressure. Inside, a narrow stairwell, sealed for decades, lined with dust, scented with something faintly floral. She descends, only a few steps, then turns back. She reports it to the chief steward, who locks the panel and silences the girl with a bribe and a promise of promotion. But the damage is done. The bells toll the next day, twice, and with them, the illusion shatters. News outlets across the empire report the hollow's rediscovery. Some call it an architectural marvel, others a symbol of royal decadence. But one headline spreads faster than any. Where did the women go? Now the questions begin. If the hollow existed, who lived there? What happened to them? Where are they now? The palace dodges every inquiry. No names are released, no records unearthed. But the people have already begun their own archive. A popular writer publishes an anonymous essay titled The Velvet Remains. In it she describes the hollow not as a place, but a pattern, a system of veils hiding the truth beneath the beauty. Within a week, street artists start painting roses on palace walls. Roses with open eyes at their centre. The message is clear. We see you. Inside the palace, the tension builds. The Queen meets with her advisory council, flanked not by generals but by scholars. She says nothing of the hollow, but she orders an inventory of every corridor, chamber and passage not currently in use. She also makes a private visit to the royal printer. A small, careful edition of a book is prepared. 100 copies, no title, no author. Inside, the manuscript Morel handed her. Each page bears a watermark, barely visible but unmistakable. A single open eye inside a spiral. The books are distributed through quiet channels. One ends up in the hands of a schoolteacher in the southern provinces. Another is found in the library of a convent where one of the former concubines now teaches embroidery. The book spreads, and with it, the hollow breathes again. No longer buried, no longer myth. In the capital, a memorial is erected, not by royal decree but by the people. A simple stone arch, placed in the plaza near the palace gates. No inscription, only a pool at its base. Visitors come by the hundreds. Some leave flowers, others notes. One day a child drops a coin into the pool and whispers, "For the lady who wrote songs." That same night the water ripples without wind. Inside the palace, Ferdinand's old chamber remains locked. No one enters. The new king, a distant cousin of Ferdinand's, rules from the western wing and keeps his throne room free of ornament. But every so often, he pauses near the eastern corridors, glancing toward the place where the walls seem too thick, the air too still. He never speaks of it. Yet he has the dreams. He dreams of a pool underground where women sing without mouths, and mirrors reflect not faces, but names. Names he does not know. Names no one tells him. The Queen retires a year after the second toll. She claims age. In truth, she's tired of shadows. She moves to a coastal villa where the sea sings through her windows, and every morning she reads a single page from the Hollow's book aloud before her tea. She never explains to her attendants why. She dies with that book beneath her pillow, and when they open it, the final page has changed, not printed, etched in Morell's hand. We are not stories, we are stone. We do not vanish, we wait. A final echo, one that will never stop sounding, not as long as someone remembers to listen. Long after the Queen's passing, the palace finds itself quieter than ever before, not in the peaceful sense, but in that hollow, in-between silence of buildings that remember too much. The new king walks its corridors with cautious dignity, always aware of where his footfalls land, as if each step might awaken a memory the stones have worked hard to forget. He was raised far from the capital, in a coastal estate where birdsong drowned out politics. When the line of succession twisted itself into his favour, he stepped into power with a promise: transparency, reform, humility. And for the most part he tries. His court is smaller, his policies more moderate. He favours public speeches over private deals, and when questioned about the Hollow, he does not deny its existence, but he refuses to speak of it directly. We are reviewing all aspects of our historical infrastructure, he says instead, eyes steady, mouth tight. Nothing buried will remain so forever. The phrase echoes. Scholars cling to it. Journalists dissect it. And the people, especially the younger generation born after the fall of Ferdinand, begin to dig. A cultural movement grows. At first it's only in academic circles. Seminars titled Veil and Voice, power structures in hidden spaces begin to pop up in city universities. A travelling exhibit, curated by a collective of artists and historians, showcases imagined reconstructions of the Hollow, crimson-draped dioramas, soundscapes of whispering voices, fabrics printed with excerpts from anonymous testimonies. But then it spills into the public. Fashion houses start incorporating hollow silhouettes, robes that mimic the flowing garments worn underground. Indie musicians sample hollow poems, layering them over minimalist instrumentals. One popular song titled Velvet Revolves reaches top charts with a chorus borrowed from one of Morell's poems. We danced where mirrors watched and walls remembered our names. And still, the Hollow speaks, quite literally. In one of the palace's lesser-used wings, once a storage area, now repurposed for public tours, a group of workers uncover a ventilation shaft lined with centuries-old piping. It hums, softly, but undeniably. An acoustics expert is brought in. She confirms that sound, perhaps music, is still travelling through the inner walls, but from where? No one can say. The shaft should be sealed. The Hollow should be silent. Yet the humming continues. They leave it alone. Tourists begin requesting access to the Echo Room, as it's now called. They sit in silence, hoping to catch a strain of the Hollow's last lullaby. Some claim to hear it. Others say it's a trick of the mind, or worse, a fabrication created by the palace to monetize its shame, but the resonance remains. Meanwhile, survivors of the Hollow begin to reappear, not dramatically, not with banners or demands. They emerge in subtle ways. One becomes a diplomat, her past hidden until she publishes a memoir titled I Spoke in Masks. Another works quietly in a rural town, teaching children the history their textbooks skip. A third, once thought lost, appears in a documentary, her voice altered, her silhouette backlit, reading aloud from one of her own poems. The world listens and asks, how many were there? No one knows. Estimates vary. Some say a few dozen. Others claim over 100. Records are scattered, many intentionally destroyed. But names begin to surface, each tied to a memory, each verified by surviving letters, garments, markings in stone. One name, when revealed, shocks the city. Zaria, the singer with the silver scarf. She had vanished from the Hollow mid-reign, presumed dismissed, possibly exiled. But now, in her 70s, she returns, not with bitterness, but with song. She performs only once. In the capital's oldest theatre, standing beneath a single spotlight, she sings the Hollow's lost hymn, the lullaby Ferdinand once played each night. But she changes it. She adds verses, names, Morell, Leora, Felice, Tari, Roxana, Lila. Her voice doesn't tremble. When she finishes, the theatre is silent for 30 full seconds. Then, thunderous applause. That night, someone leaves a bundle on the palace gates. Inside, a silver scarf, faded but intact. Attached is a note. I walked into the hollow, I walked out free. The palace staff quietly add it to the growing archive. The new king, upon hearing of the scarf, requests to see the hollow for himself. There is resistance. The old ministers warn of unrest. The preservationists demand it be treated like a tomb. But the king insists. He descends alone. Thomas, old now but still composed, guides him through the newly reinforced staircase. They reach the hollow's remnants. The pool is empty. The walls scraped bare of silk. But still, the shape remains, the ghost of beauty, the outline of control. The king walks the full circuit, stops at the whispering room, places his hand on the chair, and whispers, "I'm sorry." Then he returns to the surface. Later that year he opens a public inquiry, not just into the hollow's history, but into all the mechanisms of silence that allowed it to exist. Archives are unsealed, new names are added, and at the centre of it all, a foundation is created. The Velvet Memory Institute. Its mission: to record the stories of those made invisible. Its logo: an open eye inside a spiral beneath a falling petal. The hollow is not forgotten. It is studied, cited, honoured. In schools, students read from the Book of the Hollow. In libraries, exhibits feature the artefacts once feared. In the city, a mural is painted across a public wall, a pool reflecting not water, but stars. And beneath it, in gold, we waited. You heard. Gror. They come from everywhere. Historians, tourists, thrill-seekers, artists. Some arrive with notebooks and reverence, others with selfie sticks and a knack for exaggeration. All are drawn to the same place, the palace that once housed a hidden chamber, the palace that whispered through the stone. They call it the Hollow, though the official tour guide never does. Instead, she calls it the Eastern Under-Corridor Complex, a phrase sterile enough to please archivists and vague enough to avoid lawsuits. She wears a tailored grey blazer, a wireless mic clipped discreetly to her lapel, and a practiced smile. "This section of the palace," she begins, leading the group through a corridor once sealed behind 5 layers of brick, was recently reopened to the public after extensive structural reinforcement. What you're seeing is an architectural time capsule, one part royal utility, one part cultural mystery. Everyone in the group knows what she means. They've read the headlines, watched the docudramas, memorised the leaked passages from the Velvet Remains. Some believe every word. Others think it was all an elaborate performance, a royal PR stunt spun into myth. But no one denies the hollow's gravity. As they pass beneath an arched entry with faint remnants of mural paint, one man lags behind. He's in his 20s, dressed like a university student, eyes wide as he runs his hand along the wall. He whispers, "This is where she wrote the poem." Another visitor, a woman in her 50s with silver earrings shaped like crescent moons, nods. The part about breathing fire through the veil. I remember. They speak of the Hollow's residents as if they were saints, rebels, and muses rolled into one, and perhaps they were. A young girl asks, "Was it really underground?" The guide offers her neutral answer. Yes, the original structure sat beneath this wing, but much has changed. What you see today is a partial reconstruction, guided by accounts and recovered blueprints. The girl points toward a bronze plaque mounted on a nearby column. It reads, "To those who are hidden and those who remembered." Below it, a list of names. Only 20. Morel, Zaria, Leora, Tari, Lila, Roxana, Felice, others. The rest remain unknown. The guide doesn't mention the missing names. She moves them along to the garden wing, a painstaking replica of the Hollow's original sanctuary. Ivy now grows along copper wires, and artificial moonlight filters through a skylight designed to mimic the glow once described in a Concubine's letter. One man sits on the bench and begins to cry. He doesn't explain why. His daughter places her hand on his shoulder and says nothing. They spend time in the whispering room, now encased behind protective glass. The chair, preserved. The walls, cleaned but left raw. A recording plays softly, one of Zaria's last interviews, her voice reading a poem written by someone known only as A. "I once wore silence like silk. Now I wear fire." The group listens in stillness. One tourist, draped in luxury fabrics, a little too loud, asks, Did the king really build it just for himself? The guide replies evenly. It was built under his order, yes, but what it became belonged to others. She does not elaborate. Elsewhere in the palace, the Hollow's legacy continues to unfold in strange ways. A boutique opens nearby, offering handmade masks said to be inspired by the originals. Critics call it distasteful. Others claim the profits go towards supporting Hollow survivors. No one can prove either claim. An immersive theatre show launches in the city's southern quarter. Velvet Below, it's called. Audience members don masks, follow performers through candlelit hallways, and participate in scenes loosely based on Hollow testimonies. Some leave transformed. Others complain about historical inaccuracy. The line stretches down the block each weekend. Meanwhile, a schoolgirl in a northern province wins a national essay contest with her piece titled Why I Would Have Listened. She writes of the Hollow not as a place, but as a lesson. Her closing line becomes widely quoted. Some rooms are hidden not to protect power, but to contain the truth. Activists adopt the phrase. Murals begin to feature it. One even appears on a subway tunnel wall in another country entirely. And in a twist no one predicts, the Hollow becomes a pilgrimage site, not spiritual but symbolic. Visitors leave offerings, poems, hand-stitched ribbons, drawings of crescent moons and open eyes. The palace staff collects them weekly and stores them in a growing archive beneath the cultural wing. They call it the Living Memory Vault. The movement grows beyond the palace. New writers cite the Hollow as inspiration. Musicians sample the melodies once hummed beneath velvet. A streaming series, The Room Beneath, captures international attention. Critics praise it for its restraint, its refusal to glorify, its insistence that silence is not the same as peace. And yet, despite all this, mysteries remain. One researcher combing through the vault's contents finds a page with no known author. Written in charcoal on the back of a linen scrap it reads, "The Hollow was not built, it was exhaled." Beneath it, a thumbprint. No match found. Elsewhere, in the distant highlands, a woman who once answered to the name Roxana lives quietly, making jewellery from river stones and iron scraps. She refuses interviews, but when asked about her past, she gestures toward the forest and says, "There are still rooms out there." The reporter doesn't understand. She doesn't clarify. Because for those who lived in the Hollow, the world has shifted. Doors look different. Silence sounds less safe. And memory is no longer linear. They do not need statues. They need space. The Hollow, in its strange half-resurrected state, provides just enough. But even now, there are those who search for what lies beneath the current memorials. One group of scholars insists there's still a sealed corridor, untouched since the original closure. They've raised funds, obtained permits, begun scanning the substructure for anomalies, and in the deepest part of the foundation, near the old throne room's south wall, they detect a cavity, rectangular, unexplained, untouched. They call it the echo chamber. They plan to excavate next spring. Until then, the Hollow continues, above, below, between, living not just in walls and names, but in every story someone once tried to hide. Ferdinand's legacy, if it can be called that, becomes a knot that historians struggle to untangle. His official portrait still hangs in the Hall of Sovereigns, painted when he was only 32, gaze high, robes flowing, his hand resting on a marble globe. Below, the inscription remains intact. Order through wisdom. But few stop to look at him now. Tour groups walk past in silence. Guides no longer recount his military victories or architectural commissions. Instead, they gesture quickly and move on, because in that very same hall just around the corner stands a new exhibit. It is small, quiet, but never empty. Visitors lean in to read excerpts from letters, fragments of recovered poems, sketches of the Hollow's layout etched onto vellum. A single display case houses the crescent pendant once worn by Morel, its silk ribbon faded to a dusty grey. Beneath it, a plaque, gifted, returned, and remembered. And at the far end of the exhibit, a touchstone. Not a sculpture, not a screen. A simple slab of white marble, polished smooth, with no engraving. Visitors are invited to place their hands on it, to remember not the king, but the ones who were kept beneath his rule. Some cry, some close their eyes and whisper names, and some simply stand still. Meanwhile, Ferdinand's end fades from official accounts. He died in his sleep, the records say, peacefully, alone. But other accounts circulate. A nurse who worked in the palace infirmary claims he often spoke aloud in his final months, muttering names no one recognised. He would wake from dreams calling for someone named Echo, or whispering numbers, 7, then 5, always 2. Others say he requested a final walk through the garden, but never made it out of bed. His last recorded words were, "Is it still sealed?" No one answered. After his death, no state funeral was held. The royal court, sensing the fragility of its image, opted for a quiet interment in the southern mausoleum. A private stone, modest inscription, no public ceremony. But the hollow did not forget. In the weeks that followed, a strange bloom appeared beside the eastern wall of the palace, a single white lily growing between the stones untouched by gardeners. Some called it coincidence, others a message. It returned the following year, and the year after that. Lila is never found. Not officially. Some say she escaped, became a diplomat under another name, disappeared into the world like water into sand. Others believe she returned once, just once, to leave the ribbon found on Ferdinand's bed the night before his death. A green silk ribbon, still perfumed. There are no witnesses, but there is a photo, blurred, taken on a rainy evening outside the palace gates. A woman, tall and hooded, pausing for a moment beneath the lantern light, her left ankle glinting faintly with green. The photographer never came forward, but the image spreads. It becomes a symbol, not of revenge, but of endurance. A reminder that some truths walk beside us, long after power has vanished. The Hollow's stories become curriculum in national schools, not as scandal, but as a study in silence, how it forms, how it spreads, and how it can be broken. Students read the poems once hidden beneath cushions. They study the rules that shaped the chamber, then analyse how those rules were dismantled. They learn not just what happened, but what was allowed to happen. The Hollow, once secret, becomes framework. Activists reference it in debates about surveillance, consent, and justice. New legislation regarding transparency and governance is named the Velvet Accord, and every year, on the day the bells first tolled twice, cities across the realm hold a moment of silence. At noon, the chimes ring. 2 slow, deliberate strikes. Then a recording plays, Zaria's voice, singing the Hollow's hymn. Just once. It echoes across courtyards, through public squares, and even from radio towers in remote towns. Children sing along. Old women close their eyes. And somewhere, in a desert village with no name on the map, a woman with silver hair sits beside a dried-up well and smiles. She remembers. The Velvet Memory Institute continues its work. New testimonies are still uncovered. Objects still appear, donated by descendants, discovered in estate sales, or left anonymously in museum courtyards. One day, an archivist opens a package containing only a mirror. Round, cracked slightly at the edge, with a single phrase etched across the back. I was not the reflection. I was the light. No return address. They hang it in the Institute's central hall. Visitors often pause there longer than anywhere else. They see themselves in it, slightly distorted, imperfect, human. And in that reflection, the Hollow breathes once more, not as a chamber, but as a lesson, a promise, a flame that once flickered underground and now lights the way forward. Now the Hollow sleeps, not in darkness, but in memory. Its stones are quiet, not because they were silent, but because they have said what needed saying. Above them, the palace stands tall, weathered and wise, its hallways no longer echoing with unspeakable things, but with footsteps that know the past is never entirely behind. The garden where women once whispered to moonlight now blooms without pretense. Children run past the old pool, unaware of what once lingered beneath its surface, but their laughter weaves with the breeze, reminding the stones that life continues. The air no longer tastes of secrets, just jasmine. Some evenings, as the sun bleeds amber through the western windows, an elderly guard still walks the perimeter. He does not touch the walls or speak aloud, but he knows, he remembers, and that is enough. Elsewhere, far from the city, in classrooms and libraries and quiet balconies where stories unfold without fear, readers trace fingers over the lines of the Hollow's book. Their eyes soften, their breathing slows. Some do not realize how deeply the words settle inside them. Not until later, when silence feels heavier, and they speak. They speak. The The Hollow's final gift is not vengeance, not spectacle, but voice. A legacy not engraved on plaques, but etched into how we listen, how we ask, how we refuse to forget. And now, as your own night deepens and the shadows stretch comfortably across the floor, remember this. Even the deepest chambers cannot keep light from finding its way in. Even stories hidden in velvet and mirrors rise again, softer, slower, but stronger. So rest, dear listener. Let the echoes fade for now. The Hollow waits in peace.